And welcome once again. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our webinar is on supporting newcomer families during the back to school season. I am Krista Kartson. I'm the Welcome.us VP of Community Building and Engagement. And this event is hosted by Welcome.us. We are a nonprofit, non-government organization founded in 2021 to equip and empower Americans to participate in the work of welcoming newcomers. And this is our live monthly webinar, which we call Welcome.us at the Table. We've designed this space for welcomers who care about private sponsorship pathways, the newcomers we've welcomed, and the stories of welcome that unite us. We're in an exciting season right now as students are heading back to school. Many of you have kids of your own, or you're friends with a newcomer family with young ones preparing for the fall semester. While this transition can come with opportunities for connection and learning, the back to school season can also be uniquely challenging for newcomer families who may be navigating evolving immigration policies and potential language and cultural nuances. This webinar, hosted by Welcome.us but driven by you, our welcomer community, is proof that our new neighbors are not facing these challenges alone. For that reason, today we'll feature a panel discussion with our Senior Policy Counsel and Special Advisor, Manpreet Theji, school board member and resettlement expert, Julianne Ramich, and a sponsor, parent, and another dear colleague here at Welcome.us, Liz Kemry, to share some challenges that newcomers may be facing this season and explore tangible ways we can support them. And we won't have a time of live Q&A with our speakers today, but Manpreet will be answering questions directly in the Q&A function. So feel free to use that function throughout the webinar, and she'll do her best to respond. As always, we won't be able to answer case-specific questions either. So if you are concerned about a particular case, we encourage you to seek legal counsel by clicking the link in the chat that we're dropping now. We'll also be dedicating the full hour during October's webinar to answer broad policy and legal questions live. So please join us then for a more thorough Q&A. But for now, we'll start with some policy updates from Manpreet.
Thank you so much, Krista. So we have been tracking the Pasito v. Trump litigation, which is a class action lawsuit first filed in January that challenges the administration's pause of the U.S. refugee admissions program. So if you're a sponsor, a family member, or a friend of a refugee who is still waiting for their case to be processed or their travel to be unpaused, this case may be particularly relevant to you. So at this time, while the courts are considering the case, refugee admissions still remain paused, and no travel will be processed except for a very small number of refugees on a case-by-case basis. So if you are in the process of sponsoring a refugee and their case was referred to US RAP, meaning the refugee has a case number, they remain in the pipeline, but their case is still paused. You can stay up to date on the case by following along with the International Refugee Assistance Project's litigation tracker, which we're dropping in the chat right now. Additionally, if you are on our email list, you may have seen the news about the Uniting for Ukraine beneficiaries receiving renewal of their parole status. As you may recall, in February, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, also known as USCIS, paused processing of immigration applications for all individuals who arrived through humanitarian parole programs, including U4U and the processes for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. In May, due to a court decision, USCIS lifted that pause and began processing immigration applications. We are happy to share, though, that over the course of the last month, we have seen dozens of renewals or reparole applications get approved by USCIS for U4U beneficiaries. So if your U4U beneficiary is still awaiting a renewal for parole or work authorization, we encourage you to contact your congressional representative and submit a constituency request for their staff to do a congressional inquiry to USCIS, checking on the status of their case. You can utilize our Contact Your Representative guide to learn how to put in this request. Additionally, if your U4U beneficiary is needing legal assistance on their renewal application, you can find a legal service provider with the Ukraine Immigration Task Force that will have specialized knowledge on these recent approvals and renewal processes. Back to you, Krista.
Thank you, Manpreet. That is indeed hopeful news around the movement that we're seeing with U4U referral requests. We're now going to transition to our panel discussion, where we'll focus on some of our back to school season themes. Manpreet will stay on to cover some policies that may affect newcomer students, and we're also honored to welcome Julianne Ramich, who has served on her school district board for almost 8 years and has a 30-year career in refugee resettlement. And I'm also delighted to welcome Liz Kemery, a member of our Welcome.us team, who is also the sponsor of a Ukrainian family and a parent who has deeply engaged her children's school to support the newcomers she sponsored. Manpreet, we'll start with you. It's back to school season, which we know can be both an exciting and uniquely challenging time for any family, including newcomers. Can you give us an overview of what some of these challenges may be for newcomer families?
Absolutely. And I know this back to school season feels different and honestly more difficult than in past years. For many families, the recent expiration or termination of humanitarian parole programs and the limited alternative status options translates to the increased challenges for newcomers seeking to maintain legal status in the United States. And with those challenges, newcomers may wonder if it's legal for their children to go to school, and if it is, are they protected while they're at school? So, if we're talking specifically about back to school season, school access is a constitutional right based on a decision by the Supreme Court. All students, regardless of citizenship status, are entitled to a free public education in the United States. So, legally, all students in the US have the right to go to school, and legally, Immigration and Custom Enforcement officers are authorized to enter schools to do a search if they have a warrant signed by a judge. At this time, though, there is no reported cases that this has actually happened. So while this may be a topic of concern for newcomers, it is important to put this in perspective and help them know their rights and help them be prepared for possibilities.
That's a great point, Manpreet. Thanks. We've heard this phrase, know your rights, a lot recently. Can you help us understand who this applies to and what rights community members and newcomers might keep in mind this back to school season?
Absolutely, Krista. So, under the law, every person in the United States has rights, regardless of their immigration status. It is especially important for welcomers and newcomers to know that these protections are to prepare in advance so that they can be best equipped to handle situations respectfully and safely. So, for example, just like they need a warrant to search a school, Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers, also known as ICE, cannot come inside a home without permission or without a signed judicial warrant. So if ICE officers approach your home, you can ask them to pass the warrant to you under the door to check the validity of the paperwork, like making sure it's signed by a judge. I won't go into more detail here, but I want to say that Welcome.us has developed a useful resource hub that provides multiple Know Your Rights materials, guidance for determining next steps in the cases of humanitarian parole termination, and other useful tools for newcomers and sponsors. There are also resources in there that discuss what to do in case you have an encounter with ICE outside the home in a public space. So I encourage anyone with questions on this to please check out this resource. Additionally, if you're an educator navigating immigration enforcement and deportation policies in your school, you might also find value in the school preparedness plan or other resources for refugees developed by an organization called Fuji's Family. This resource outlines steps to create a communication plan, encounter procedures, and contingency planning. So, particularly if you work in a school and you still have questions about what your school can do to prepare, we'll share this link with you in the chat as well.
Thank you, Manpreet. This is a fantastic resource. You've shared really valuable information today. Can I ask you to just boil it down slightly? What recommendations do you have for welcomers who are listening and who are walking alongside newcomer families with students this school year?
It's a great question. I would first say that the first thing you should do is review the Know Your Rights material. Our resource hub can walk you through that, and that can help you be better equipped and equip others as well. Second, I'd say keep listening. Our next two speakers are going to provide some more details on what the community can do to support newcomers.
All right, we'll keep listening. And with that, Julianne, welcome. You are a school board member of 8 years and you've worked in refugee resettlement for 30. So, dare I say, you've seen it all. As a member of a school district board in Pennsylvania, you've gotten a unique perspective on the experiences of newcomers in your local education system. Can you tell us what are some of the factors that you've seen impact the school experience for newcomer students throughout the years?
Yes, thank you so much. And it's just such an honor to be here and speaking on a topic that is near and dear to both my professional life and my professional heart and hat and then my service hat. So to have this world collide is absolutely wonderful. So I think in terms of challenges, I think that I think one of the things that we often want to look at is how are schools preparing to welcome immigrant students. And I think it is something that is an ongoing challenge. So school districts and school personnel work to meet the needs of students as a collective, but then they also recognize that each individual student's needs are unique. And so they are accustomed to working to meet the needs of the collective, but to do it in a way that approaches the individual need. And that same applies with immigrant students as well. So finding ways of connecting and making those touch points. But I often think sometimes we think about those welcoming activities happening in just a classroom. And I started my day off today with a meeting at an elementary school, and I got to then be part of greeting students as they got off the bus and made their way into the building. And I think when our students are in that experience, they are navigating getting on and off a bus and remembering whether mom, told them that they need to take the bus home or do they do something different that day. They walk past a lot of adults who are greeting them and are happy to see them, walk through hallways, go into the classroom, but they then also go into an art room and a library and a cafeteria. And all of those touch points are opportunities for new things and for potential challenges, right? So how lunch is served in a school, it might be very different than a lunch that they might have had in their home country. The food tastes different, it looks different. And so touching base with the students, not just to ask, did you like the pizza that you ate today? But really getting to know what might you like with it, or is it enough, or is it served in the right way? I think are things that are really important for us to work together with our schools. Oftentimes our schools and our school personnel are dealing with a lot of really big challenges. Schools are bureaucratic entities that have to rely on federal, state, and local tax dollars and policies that come down from those. So, the success of the kids that are in those schools and those newcomers in particular, it's our part to play in connecting. So I encourage you all who are welcomers to connect with school board, making sure that the policies are set to then support immigrant students. And so policies lead to administrative procedures that lead then out to how things are implemented in a particular school. So knowing how that flows. Schools also are required not to collect information on an immigration status per se, but they are collecting a lot of really good data. So it is really interesting as a community to sit down and look at home language data, the number of English language learners in a school. So schools are constantly looking at, do we need to add a new teacher and a new class for our English language learners in this elementary school? Do we need to add additional supports at a middle school? So they're constantly using data to make decisions on a larger level. But the personal stories that those students have and that you have in working with them also need to be shared. So a school board meeting is a great place to do that. An email or a parent teacher conference, ways of engaging, I think are so critical in that way. I think another challenge that we don't talk enough about, school districts are often, they'll start the year off getting to know a student, then they go into assessments, and then they go into testing. And there's a lot of requirements for student outcome to be able to report up to a state. But when you have newcomer students who have had such gaps in their education or who are new to English language and then also have to test them, making sure that we're meeting the students where they're at, but also juggling the balance of what the demands on a school district are, I think are really important. And so I think looking at connecting them to community resources and school resources to help support addressing those gaps in education. So if you're working with a family and there is a child under the age of 5, so not yet in a kindergarten classroom, connecting them to an early education program like a Head Start program or a state supported pre-K program can go so far in helping that child to address any gaps or to address any of that of the trauma of their migration that might have come with that. I will also say that I think some of those programs and schools are great places for the parents of our families to also get a start in the job market. So there are entry level or great starter positions within schools and within early education programs that I often think we overlook and we'll assume that stocking shelves on a Walmart is a great job, but so might be serving food in a cafeteria at a school. I think can elementary schools lend themselves for warm, welcoming environments, and I think there's lots of opportunities for kids to connect. But there's also lots of opportunities for community and parents to engage as well. So being engaged in an ESL classroom, there was a great example, I think, in one of our elementary schools where the ESL teachers hosted a Thanksgiving dinner so that English language learners could taste their first traditional meal and to have those conversations. We're off for the next, long weekend. Here's what we will be doing so that even outside of their school, there was a sense of a connection with that community. Um, so I think when we also then get to kind of middle school, high school, those are harder because kids' schedules are far more compartmentalized. So the time to connect and to feel like you're part of a school community can be a little harder. And I think that's where we need to put the effort in. And certainly a child who has experienced what our refugee families have and those gaps and the migration experience, they deserve a normal middle school and high school experience. But the older they are when they enter the US educational system, the harder it is to make up for those gaps. So, after school programs, extended school year where you're able to extend English language into a summer so that they don't have that summer slide, those are all really promising practices that I think are really good. And then one effort, I think, with students in college, I think sometimes, I mean, in high school, a lot of our students, the expectation is to look at post-secondary, whether it's college or other options. And for older refugee youth who may have had a gap or didn't have, maybe had their education in another language, the expectation to be able to finish a few years of high school in the US and go on to college may be insurmountable or may be very difficult. So often a lot of school districts do have tech schools that are connected with them. And there was a kind of out of a school district, an update that I had heard, they had placed Afghan arrivals in a high school, and some had chosen a tech ed program. And the English language acquisition of those in a tech school was far, far exceeded those that went into a high school. And they would finish then with strong English skills and a skill in a trade to be able to then enter the workforce or to go on for additional training. So I think finding ways in our traditional pathways to be able to help connect students and making sure that there's something for them. So an extracurricular activity may not be a natural fit. So can a club be created? Can a conversation club in a middle school and high school where those students have a chance to connect or a mentorship program? There's so many opportunities to take best practices and apply them.
That's amazing, Julianne. Thank you so much. And I just like cannot help but smile when you talked about greeting and welcoming those kids for their, in the morning off the school bus and into the school building. That's so sweet.
Best way for me to start my day for sure.
So sweet. I'm kind of jealous. And you gave us so much to think about for especially folks who are working in the education system about how do we expand and reconsider like how we serve newcomers, even with the limited resources that we have. But for folks like me who aren't educators or part of our school system kind of on a daily basis, I'd love to learn from you, what kind of creative solutions have you seen the community come up with to kind of help welcome and overcome some of these initial challenges? So like from your experience, what are the ways that your community has rallied around newcomer families?
I think this is an endless topic, and I would love to hear from others as well. But I think one for me that has been incredibly heartwarming that I need to go back and check to see how they're doing. But kids, oftentimes our newcomer kids in our schools do qualify for free and reduced lunch. And I think that that is one of the greatest gifts that we can give them. And especially with families that are really struggling, if they can get two really good meals in school, it relieves the burden on parents to be able to to meet those needs. But the food needs to be as culturally appropriate as it possibly can within the very strict guidelines that our school nutrition services must follow. So within our own district, one thing that or two things that I've loved to see that they did was that they're testing it at the high school right now. They set up a spice station, and I will say that to meet the federal guidelines, nothing can have sodium in it. And so it has to be like it's very strict within that. But kids can bond over whether they want paprika on something or cumin, and it can start a conversation. Or I think we focus so much on helping our new refugee students feel welcome, but there's also so much opportunity for our students to then also connect with these newcomers and learn and grow too. So if it can connect over food, it works in so many other ways. So why not put a spice table out? Within our school district, our school nutrition services is in-house. And so they are working to bring in guest chefs. And those might be just members from a community to make sure that the menus are reflective of our student population. And so being able to take a recipe and be able to then adapt it to be able to be something that can be cooked or prepared in a school kitchen is something that's a little challenging, but I love the concept and idea of a cultural exchange in that way. I also recently met a caterer, so speaking from the community, who had learned that children who their families choose to eat halal meals do have a hard time. It means that you might only eat the cheese pizza and you eat that every day. But they are now setting up commercial kitchens in the greater Philadelphia area where they're going to be preparing meals, and then a district can contract for to have 10 meals delivered to this school, 20 meals delivered there, to be able to help offset some of that kind of need within a community. I think definitely staying engaged is another way. So I'm attending a school board meeting tonight. There is time for public comment. There's time for engagement, making sure that school districts are being held accountable and are making sure that these services are in place. And it is a duty of a school board member to advocate. And so I will then say that advocating for the continuation of Title III funding is really critical. Title III funding is what supports English language learning within school districts. And so that funding has been stopped, started. We're not sure what's happening with it. Is critical. Title I is funding to low income schools, and often those two services go hand in hand and meet the needs of our students. So it might be in reading enrichment. So a student can go from English language support into a reading enrichment, and that's going to help set them up for success. So these are critical services and really ones that we all need to be advocating for.
Thank you. That's so helpful. We received a registration question from a social worker who asked how they can get involved in schools. Do you have specific guidance for folks who might be social workers?
I saw that question. I'm a social worker by training too, so I was so happy to see that. And I think that there are social workers that are serving within schools, social workers that may be supporting schools, and so social workers are those connectors, right? And so I think a great idea and a great way of helping out with that is to host and partner with a school district to host a community resource fair. So a lot of times our English language learners may not know where to go to get services outside of a school district and maybe a resettlement agency or their welcoming family. And so being able to help connect them to other resources is really helpful. So a health center where they can go for vaccines if they're still working to get on a vaccine schedule and updated to get the requirements met, English language classes, those types of things, and being able to offer that, but also then making sure that services that are offered within the school district are represented too, so that it's an opportunity for them to learn about, some school districts have a community education arm. So does that community education arm have an ESL class? Can they maybe take their child to a Saturday morning art class? So making sure that there's the school to community connection on both sides for parents.
I love that. Thank you. So I'm going to make a hard pivot now. We've heard about community education programs. We've heard about connecting over food, which I'm a big proponent of personally. We've heard about using our skills and expertise as social workers to engage and offer those services to our local school district and a few other ways that we might consider getting involved as community members. Can you tell us like what would be a good next step like if we haven't ever gotten involved before, what would your recommendation be to like get kind of started in navigating where we might fit as community members and helping?
I'm going to make another shameless pitch for school board, right? So making sure and just checking, right? And making sure that the policy from the, kind of from the highest levels is there to support immigrant newcomers. I am also a big fan of making sure that school libraries or the classrooms within a teacher's library within a classroom have books that represent the children that are in that class. And there are some beautiful books about the Ukrainian experience, the Afghan experience. And so, whatever age appropriate books, can those be donated? And so, doing a book donation. Making sure that kids start off the year with school supplies. So backpack, donation drives are always a big hit. And then finding ways of helping to support them to connect with community and extracurricular activities. So whether every child in our school deserves to be a child and deserves to have access to recreation and to play and to academic excellence. And so making sure that any barrier that might exist. Maybe it's language, maybe it's economics, helping to address those barriers. And I also think it's also a fun thing to do, or at least fun for me, is to explore the communities where our English language learners are living. Do a walk of the neighborhood. What does it look like if they're walkers to a school? What does their walk look like? Is it safe? Is it, is there, and if it isn't, and there needs to be a sidewalk improvement, get that reported. Chances are their parents don't know where to report it, so we can. But looking where kids are living and what resources may need to be pushed or pushed out to those communities or how to connect them back to a school.
You've got my wheels turning already. Thank you, Julianne. Even, yeah, just thinking about one of my sponsorship experiences, a family that I sponsored moved near a busy street. And so part of our orientation just in the neighborhood, not even necessarily walking to school, but was making sure, we follow the traffic lights and the walk sign, that's there for a reason, to keep them safe. And so even things that we might not think about as really big impact activities, could really make a difference in helping them understand what life is like here in the US.
I'm so glad you brought up that topic of orientation, right? We use
Mm.
that term community or cultural orientation with refugee newcomers all the time, and we kind of then stop after that 90-day period. But
Mm.
that orientation, that is something that we can all be part of, whether it's making sure that they understand, you shared your concerns about a busy street, but there's orientation and into the community, into the school community as well, right?
Mm.
So things that I had to learn as a parent, right? So, oh my gosh, I didn't realize. I mean, I think I was pretty embarrassed as a mom that I didn't get a health form in time because I just didn't know that it was required for all fourth graders, right? So imagine an immigrant parent not knowing, getting that notice in that sense of failure, right? So, but how a parent engages with the school and the requirements, there's so much of an opportunity for modeling what is a good, how do I engage with the teacher, but also learning from them. What were your expectations of, in your country, in your home country, of how you engaged with a teacher in school? How does it differ? And then what are the best practices and how we do that? And what are the might be the expectations here in the US? So offering that and extending that orientation and that approach through every facet of your work with families.
That's so good. Yeah, because I can imagine education systems and culture are different in other countries. And so there might be some unseen where, like, talking about crossing a street is kind of obvious, but talking about how, like, what our parent-teacher conferences or what forms are required and why, might be some of those unseen orientation steps to walk alongside your newcomer to navigate. I've got one more question for you. You've been so insightful. What about for maybe some of the newcomers who might be tuning in right now and they're interested in receiving some of that support you've mentioned? Maybe they've like realized, oh, there is a cultural difference here. I'm not quite getting what I think I need to get, out of this experience and need a little support. How might they go about reaching out to their school?
So I think we're talking about like the back to school kind of theme. And so usually right now kids, right, are settling into school, settling into routine. They're, usually now they will start to work in the next couple of weeks on assessments. And then that will lead into parent teacher conference. So making the most of the parent teacher conference, writing down notes, questions that you may have, making a request now as to whether that could be scheduled or when it could be scheduled, and could there be an interpreter available, are all things that I think are completely within reason. But teachers will also usually communicate about what their expectations are with regards to communication. You obviously at elementary, they want to have more parent-child communication. By middle and high school, they put the responsibility more on the student. So then also making sure that you're working with your student on giving you the feedback about what has happened on that day in school and what they need to know, and so that parents and children can learn together. I also think there are great resources within our school counselors. They can often be great guides. So whether it's a school counselor or a social worker in the school, principals act often as kind of a building leader, but also are connecting in with the community as well. Just, this morning when I was at the school drop off, the number of school personnel from paraprofessionals working with special ed students up to the principal, they were engaged and outside. So I did see several parents of English language learners walk their students up and be able to have a level of engagement. So do not be afraid to connect with anyone that you see. They may not be the right person, but they know who that person is. So connecting back there.
Thank you so much, Julianne. It's so powerful to hear how you've combined your subject knowledge, of the resettlement space with your heart for educating students. And thank you for everything you do to pour into our students, whether they're Americans and newcomers alike. Just want to thank you and thank educators who might be tuning in, that social worker who posed the question. We're just really thinking about you, especially at this time, and just how much you sacrifice for our students and for the children in this country. And just want to give you a special shout out and thanks. So thank you, Julianne, also for just spending your time with us today to share your expertise. It's been really, really fruitful. And so now I want to turn it over to Liz, my colleague at welcome.us. You are also a sponsor of a Ukrainian family, and you're a mom to three amazing boys who I've had the privilege of meeting. Tell me, what are some of the ways that your sons, your school, and your community have stepped in to support the family you sponsored?
Absolutely. Thank you, Krista. So I'm so happy to be on this panel today and hear from Monpreet and Julianne. Julianne, I'm definitely going to take some of the things that you shared. I've been thinking, like, as you've been talking, these things that can help us at our school. So this is a topic that's very close to my heart. As Krista said, we have three kids of our own. And in 2022, our family sponsored a Ukrainian family who had two kids. My oldest and their oldest are the same age, so they became fast friends. And when we welcomed this family, our school community was the first and best supporter for this family. The family came just before the holiday break. So we had some time in December where they could meet the principal and faculty, get their school supplies and uniforms together, tour the school, get into the classrooms. And something that I thought was really sweet and just a really special moment was the fifth grade class that this child was going to go into, invited him to come and enjoy their Christmas party in December before he started in January, which really provided like a nice opportunity for him to like meet the kids in a less formal space and just sort of enjoy the moment and feel like he was part of the group. So, my two older sons, who are now in middle school, and I discussed how they could help their new friend adjust and meet new students in the school. They included him in their activities. They tried to help explain routines and events at the school and get to introduce him to other students and other classes that they had. It's interesting, Julianne, when you were talking about, the differences between schools. When we spoke to them early on, they were very surprised that every year and within the day that the students were seeing different teachers. So for them, they carried the same teacher with them for several years, which I had no idea. So this was a totally different experience for him. We also made it a point to invite their new friend to join and watch our kids' sports and activities to give him a sense of what it looked like in our community and hopefully spark some interest in things that he might want to join later on. I checked in with his mom regularly to explain things like dress down days because the kids were typically in uniforms, or what a class party entails and what our school programs were like a talent show or the spring musical. And even just things that we take for granted, like you had talked about paperwork, for us, like adding money to a school lunch account, which I probably mess up every time I do it. So, making sure that they understand those things. Before the newcomer family joined our community, I shared with them that we had really hoped to do an in-kind school-wide fundraiser to help them get settled in their new home. And one thing is I wanted to make sure they were comfortable with that and that we worked together on a list that made sense for them in their new space. So it was kind of fun. At the time, for a short period, they lived with us before they got their apartment. And the mom went around my kitchen and living room, and her English was pretty good, but she would, pick things up and say, "This is great. This I don't need. If we could, we can add this on as a bonus." And we came up with a list together and sent that out to the school. And the response was amazing. The donations that they got, the family said it felt like Christmas every day. They got the furniture that they needed. They got gently used and new toys for the kids, things like home essentials and cleaning supplies, and even gift cards to places like Target or the local grocery store. I'll say our school is especially good at welcoming because we live in a military town. And so we're just a few minutes from a US Army college that attracts families from all over the world who either come and take classes or teach classes there. Our kids and the students at their school are pretty accustomed to making quick friends and supporting each other. And even though it's hard, learning how to say goodbye and stay in touch when the time comes. So maybe because of that, or maybe just because of the community that we're in, we still have today a lot of teachers and parents who will stop my husband or I and ask how the family is doing that we welcomed. And the good news is they're doing great. Like in December, it'll be 3 years since they've been here. Their oldest son is thriving in 8th grade, and their youngest will turn 5 in December. They have their schedules and their friends. And for new people in our community, they probably wouldn't know, the difference of how they got here. So we're really excited that we've been able to support them in that way.
Thank you, Liz. That's so encouraging that community members who partnered with you in welcoming this family 3 years ago are still so invested in making them feel like part of the community. Can you tell us more about how you're approaching this school year in particular, given some of the policy updates that we heard from Manpreet?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, this family is pretty established at this point. But when we got to the start of the school year, it did feel a little different and it felt heavier because there were new challenges and new concerns with many of the policies that were changing. And we also had some staff turnover between last year and this year. So there were some faculty members and staff, and even our new principal who didn't know about the history of our school supporting this Ukrainian family. So over the summer, I reached out to our new principal and I asked him if we could have a meeting. I wanted to share the story and talk about some of my concerns. I didn't know what would happen if this family lost their status or how the staff might react if ICE showed up at the front office, or even, ways that our family or other families like ours could continue to support on a daily basis families like the Ukrainian family that we welcomed, or I know there's others in our school that are in a similar situation. So of course, we sat down over the summer. He was very happy to have the conversation. And the first thing that he did, which was just so like heartening to me, was that he pulled the yearbook over on his desk and flipped over to 8th grade and said, "Can you tell me his name? I want to look at his picture and, make a mental note there." And which immediately made me feel much more comfortable. And then, of course, he went on to address my concerns and my questions. So I would say that, if anybody's in a situation where they have concerns or questions like mine, whether you're a parent or you're just a neighbor or you're somebody who welcomed a family as well, I'd really encourage you to reach out to your school leadership and have that meeting. You'll get to understand what your school's approach is, how they're supporting students on a daily basis, and hopefully learn how you can jump in with some of the suggestions that Julian mentioned as well and offer additional support.
Thank you, Liz. In addition to your role as parent and sponsor, you're also the senior managing editor here at welcome.us, and you've been busy and intentional about creating resources for welcomers to help navigate what school support looks like this year. Can you share more about this new resource with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a lot of educators in our family and friends circle. My parents were educators, one in a city school and one in a private school. And we had a lot of conversations over the summer about the concerns that we had. For example, one of my family members works in an inner city high school. And depending on what headlines were hitting the news that week, or even what rumors were going around neighborhoods at that time, they saw an increase in absenteeism. And it deeply concerned her that her students and their families were fearing some of these policy changes and how immigration enforcement may impact them directly. So, we talked amongst ourselves over the summer and how can we help? How can we show up as a support system? And what can we do on a day-to-day basis just to help create that more welcoming environment at the schools in our communities? And based on that, and some of those questions that we had and other friends were discussing, we created a back to school resource that offers some concrete ways that anybody, whether you're a sponsor or a welcomer, a neighbor, or just a friend, can reach out to new families and provide support. This resource spans everything from offering to help parents fill out paperwork to organizing small groups of trusted adults who can jump in and help for transportation or emergency situations, to suggesting what types of information and documentation that families might want to keep prepared if there's an emergency or a change in immigration status. We've also offered examples to help you start a conversation with families on these topics. If you choose to offer support by creating a carpool or being listed as an emergency contact, you might want to approach the conversation by saying, I know some families are creating support networks for things like school pickups. If that's something that you're thinking about, I'd be happy to help or to be a backup contact. And these resources offer welcomers practical ways that they can help newcomer families today. It shows that you can be a trusted resource and a reliable network for families when they need it most. I'd also like to note that it's important to share that we can offer to be someone that they can count on, but also respect their space and comfort level. Sometimes I reach out and the answer is, no, thank you. We don't need it right now, but we appreciate that you checked in, and that's great too.
It is great. And thank you so much, Liz, for this beautiful resource, walking us through it and just all the thought and intention that went into designing it. And a big thanks to all our panelists for sharing their time and expertise with us today. In the spirit of being a welcoming community, as one thing that Julianne alluded to earlier, I wanted to take a moment to celebrate all of you who contributed to our back to school donation drive. Last month, we partnered with Project Worth More, a nonprofit in Colorado dedicated to welcoming and supporting the newcomer community there, to create a wish list of school supplies and hygiene products. And we're really excited to announce that thanks to you, over 2,000 items were donated, which directly benefited over 400 local families. For families arriving with just a couple of suitcases and the weight of starting over, your support means their children can walk into school more prepared to learn. And so I really want to thank you for your generosity and support to these sweet kiddos. And with the time we have remaining, I also wanted to lift up another opportunity to engage in this work, which is really beginning to flourish. For those who have attended our webinars in the last couple of months, you've heard about our new welcomer communities, which are groups for American welcomers like you to share knowledge, networks, and access expert resources in support of newcomers. Members of our welcomer communities live in the same state, which makes information sharing and more localized resources more relevant to our members. I myself am a member of our Ohio group, and we connect through local monthly Zoom meetings and a WhatsApp group so that you can always have the ability to connect with others and exchange resources right at your fingertips. One great example of how these welcomer communities are supporting each other on our monthly Zoom calls is our Iowa group, which had a really robust conversation led by one of the members recently, Angela Bolins, who leads a local organization called Iowa Nice. Angela shared during the meeting how Iowa Nice has been supporting Ukrainians these last few months, which inspired an engaging conversation about what the asylum seeking process looks like, what are best practices for inspiring and engaging our local communities, and ways to talk with our representatives. But these were all designed within the specific context of the state of Iowa. And you don't have to lead an organization to join or benefit from a welcomer community, but you do have to reside in one of the states where we currently have a community. So those are the states of Georgia, Iowa, North Carolina, South Carolina, North Dakota, Wisconsin, Texas, Florida, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. So if you're in one of these states and you want to connect with other welcomers in your state, please check out the page that was dropped just now in the chat to learn more about what these communities entail and to submit an interest form. There's no commitment, just show up for a really good, robust conversation with other folks, like-minded folks in your state. So we've covered a lot of ground today, and I just wanted to quickly recap some next steps you might consider taking after receiving all that information. We've got ways to engage and discover more ways to engage newcomers in your community around the back to school theme through the resource that Liz shared. We've got opportunities to connect through our welcomer communities in your state, and ways to learn. Take a look at that resource hub that Manpreet mentioned earlier about how to know your rights as newcomers and as welcomers walking alongside our new neighbors. All these links and a link to this recorded webinar will be in your email tomorrow. So you'll be able to take a look at those. And we'll close in just a few seconds, but before we do, we ask that you respond to a short survey that will pop up on your screen once the webinar ends. We'd love to hear your recommendations for future webinar topics and your lingering questions that we could address next month, which will happen on October 16th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, where we'll have a real dedicated time to answering your policy, legislation, and other immigration-related questions with lawyers and policy experts. It's going to be a really good, robust discussion. So I hope you join us then. The registration link is right in the chat. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It means so much that you chose to spend the last hour with us, and I hope you found it helpful. I look forward to seeing you back here at the table on October 16th. And until then, be well.